Hey everyone, this is a Q&A about my video, The City of Zhim. I would recommend that you watch that one first if you haven't already. You can find it in the description. So, to start off with, Metwig2369 and SCTG-B1C both asked whether Zhim is on Earth, like in the far future, if there was some kind of apocalypse. So no, it's a different planet. It's a Earth-like planet, but the cosmology of this universe is very different. I did a video about this last year. The laws changed a little bit, but basically the planet is the center of the universe, right? It's about the same size as Earth, except it's not an oblate spheroid, and like the sun and a couple of other satellites go around it. And it exists on a manifold. It's a three-dimensional manifold embedded in a 4D universe. So there are these four gods, right? The Yegara Yarda. They're four-dimensional beings, and they sing, they speak in matter, right? They're made of something which is like even more real than matter. So they sing and harmonize, and that's what creates the little universe which the world exists in. I think there was some kind of past civilization, but I like the idea that everything turns out okay in the end, and Zhim is how it turns out. But that brings me to the next question, which is from Chief Kai. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing anyone's names wrong, by the way. Are the people of Zhim religious at all? I just saw your video where you showed 4 different gods. Also, what is the Amagcatan's relationship with the gods? What's important to know about the gods in this world is they don't need to be worshipped. They don't ask that we worship them, and they also don't hide themselves. They don't require faith to believe in. You know, it's a bit like electricity or something. Like that's kind of a mystical-ish sounding thing, right? But there's loads of evidence for it, so you don't need like faith to believe in it, as opposed to like chi or prana or something. Despite that, some people probably would still worship the gods, because I think people do kind of like to worship something, right? Humans, just for some reason, we quite like worshipping things. And maybe some people, there are different sects, some people like worship nature and that kind of stuff. And maybe some people worship the Amagcatan. I think maybe there would be periods in Zhim's history, maybe in the past, people kind of worshipped the Amagcatan, and then they sort of, you know, there was a movement to no, we shouldn't worship it. We should see it more as a kind of public service. Like it's not healthy to be worshipping this thing. And that's interesting as well, because worshipping a public service, or venerating a public service, at least. Like I live in England, right? We have the NHS, and I mean the NHS is flawed from like kind of a decade and a bit of underfunding, but the concept of the NHS I think is really, really good. You know, like kind of free healthcare for everyone. And I think the NHS is very, very popular and very venerated, and some would say even like worshipped sometimes. I think, I mean, maybe not worship, but I think venerating these like really useful, good public services, I think it's good to be grateful for things like that. But then again, I mean, then there's a point where if you get to with the Amagcatan, say you worship it to the point of believing in its utter infallibility and like utter, the way it is right now is totally perfect, that could be dangerous, I think. What is the Amagcatan's relationship with the gods? So I think that the gods aren't always super invested in human affairs, you know, but I think the Amagcatan would kind of, one of the things it would do would be to sort of study the gods and gain knowledge about them. And maybe, again, not set in stone, but maybe, say, the god of order had like a hand in creating the Amagcatan. Maybe it gave people some of the technology they needed. I don't know, although that kind of contradicts what I just said about them not being super interventionist. Maybe they only intervene in very, very rare occasions. SCTG-B1C says, wouldn't dozens of orders of magnitude more intelligent probably be enough to figure out any tech humans could ever come up with? So how do people invent stuff? And Lazy Ugg replied, it's probably invented everything the humans could make in its mind, but it just doesn't tell the humans to let them invent it for themselves. And this comment wasn't here when I recorded this bit, but Zerifem something QG2PY said, because making things is fun, even if it's technically been made before, which I do wholeheartedly agree with. I think that people kind of use the Amagcatan to like help them design stuff, often on a small scale. You know, like it could help you make a kind of design a surround sound system or for your living room or something like that. I quite like those YouTube channels, kind of like DIY perks, Tom Stanton, many more that I can't think of off the top of my head. There's people who just kind of like make things. There's also, I don't know, Sebastian Leg is another one. He did kind of make things on computers, but like people who just kind of mess around, do things for fun, like make little projects. It's not necessarily like earth-shattering, like ground-shaking technologies, but I think I like the idea of the kind of culture in Zhim being a bit like that. People just like making these cool little gadgets and all that kind of stuff for fun with the help of the Amagcatan. I don't know if it necessarily knows all of the inventions. Like maybe it's thought of them, but I don't know if it just idly thinks of things. I think it would be more preoccupied with running the city's systems. Thing is, I think that they've reached a state of technology where they don't really need to innovate anymore. Most of the stuff they invent is kind of for fun. Nomi asks, what is the status of cats, if there are cats? Yes, they do have cats. But I think they wouldn't see them as like kind of personal property like we do. You wouldn't say like, I am the owner of this cat. It's more like a kind of non-human friend or non-human family member. I think the same thing would go for other domestic animals, right? Like, I think they have dogs, but they don't like selectively breed them. I guess maybe they did. People did in the distant past, and that's why they have kind of dogs rather than wolves. I think also they wouldn't keep any livestock. All of their meat and like animal product equivalent is made by the Amagcatan artificially, or grown from plants which are kind of like modified to resemble animal products. Willow asks, what would happen if I in fact licked the streets? I think you'd probably be fine. It might be about as risky as like licking a desk in a classroom or like the armrest on the seat on a train or something. Like, you probably shouldn't do it. The streets are kept fairly clean by the Amagcatan, but obviously it's hard to sanitize something that people walk on all day. If you did get sick, there's very good medical care available, so you wouldn't be sick for very long. It wouldn't be that much of a pain. It might be a bit like having a headache and taking a paracetamol kind of thing. Erin asks, what would someone do that didn't enjoy the main fruits of the land? I'm going to assume that she means the dongyubo, the meat fruit. And if you didn't like the meat fruit, or maybe didn't like meat in general or something, there's lots of choice available. There's lots of a very wide variety, a wider variety than we have available to us because of all the genetic engineering and stuff like that. So if you wanted to eat, some succulent kind of carrot-esque legume, carrots aren't legumes, then you could have at it. Jacksinator5999 asks, why did you choose to live in the woods? Well, the real reason why the narrator comes from the woods is like for storytelling reasons, right? I wanted to present Zhim from an outsider's perspective because I think it's just kind of more accessible that way, because obviously the audience also doesn't know anything about Zhim. If you want like an in-universe explanation, maybe the narrator was kind of born in the woods, their family lived there for some reason, they didn't like it, so they kind of chose to make the journey to Zhim. I think that the Amagcatan would kind of reach out little, electricity and water and kind of resources to people who live in the woods so that they can have some amenities, so they're not just like totally cut off. Corey Stuff asks, how does your mind create all of this over so many years? It seems like you have an idea of a universe and are slowly creating something special. Secondly, how do you stay motivated with this channel despite the limited reception? Do you care, or is it solely for you? I guess ultimately how, right? I suppose you think about things. It's fun to think about how the world could be different, and just kind of to come up with imaginary worlds. It's a good exercise kind of in applying your knowledge about the real world, and kind of twisting it and distorting it into a fantasy one. I guess this sort of gets to the second question. I mean, I think I do it largely for myself. Like, I kind of feel often that when I make things like this, it's like a bit like an extension of myself. I'm kind of realizing a part of my mind and making it sort of concrete, although it is a kind of lossy process. That said, though, I mean, I do want to share it with other people as well, and if it does well, that is something that I appreciate a lot. Like, in some hypothetical world, if I couldn't share these things with anyone, like I couldn't show anyone, who knows if I'd make it. Maybe I would. I don't know what things I've made that I've never shared with anyone. I remember in first year my tutor asked us this question, which was like, there's a guy trapped on a desert island and he starts doing paintings, and is it art if there's no audience? Like, is an audience an integral part of the art? Do you need an audience for it to be art? And my tutor thought that you did, and he knew his shit, so I guess maybe he had a point, but I'm not sure. Metwig2369 asks, what is the drug/substance culture of Zhim like? I heard in the video that people smoke Ajabang. Very close. Ajabang with an E. Ajabang is like a kind of psychedelic chemical substance that you smoke. I think it comes from a flower of some description, like a sort of chrysanthemum type affair. And you smoke it in a very high-tech, whirring, whizzing, buzzing, glowing, all that stuff machine called a ejebetem, which means ejeber machine. Ejeber is the root morpheme, and the ejebeng, the eng, is a accusative morpheme. And it, makes everything look really, really perfect. You see patterns. It makes everything look really beautiful, and kind of you can hear music and stuff. Some people say that when you smoke it, it's a way of like talking to the gods. Sometimes the one of the gods will appear before you. It's said to be a kind of a drug of the god of order. It makes you think more quickly. It also sort of makes you a bit chilled out, though. It reduces anxiety. It lasts for like 10 minutes or so. It's not physically addictive. Some people do get a psychological dependence on it. And it's very hard to overdose on. The active dose is normally in the tens of milligrams, and the LD50 for most people is somewhere in the hundreds of grams. It's a similar drug to DMT in the real world. So that is to say, if you hadn't gathered already, Zhim has a very liberal attitude to drugs. Like, they certainly don't criminalize drugs or anything. And the drugs are kind of specially designed to not be physically addictive, and not be like easy to overdose on, and not have like too much of a come down or anything like that. Maybe they use some drugs kind of just utility, kind of like caffeine type things. I'm sure they'd use some socially as well. Also, I think they'd have psychedelics and stuff too, maybe for like kind of spiritual things. Or I suppose in a world where the relationship with the gods is kind of a rational-ish one, maybe the psychedelics like Ejebeng are kind of seen as quite a practical thing. But I wonder if there was no need to do anything, right? Like, you could just stay in bed all day and you won't like lose your house or anything. Would some people just do drugs? I mean, probably some, right? I think people often develop drug dependencies when they're trying to escape from reality, and if reality is nice and everyone has like a good support network and stuff, hopefully that would be minimized. Corbin says, I'm assuming this isn't the only human society in this world. How do they nominally interact with outsiders? I guess you could say that all the cities form like a single society because they're pretty well connected with one another. There's generally a spirit of solidarity between all people, including those who live outside a city. But that said, people can still sometimes be a little bit prejudiced or tribalistic, though it isn't systemic or particularly common. Leon asks, is there any laws or government in Zhim, or is everything decided by that big cool guy? So I think they do have some laws and some government. The Amagcatan does a lot of the kind of administrative work of government. It's very important that people are in control. The Amagcatan is at their disposal. I think the main way of democracy is by people, talking to the Amagcatan and kind of collaborating with the Amagcatan. And I think you'd have kind of assemblies and stuff, like people in each block would kind of come together and like make decisions about the future and stuff. The thing is, because the Amagcatan is like this great mind, right? It has the capacity to give everyone like a really specialized degree of attention, like a parent should their young. And the thing is, the Amagcatan is not like a human, in that it's not like, it doesn't have these sort of ego and all these kind of human flaws that we have. It is like designed specifically to do this job. It's much more kind of trustworthy with this and rigorous than a human would be. Like, because if you vote for something, a politician says they'll do something, 9 times out of 10 they don't do what they promised. Or voting in a parliamentary democracy or like a whatever, you're fairly removed, you have fairly little say. But in this one, everyone kind of has a direct line of communication to the government, basically, which is the Amagcatan. That's not to say that I think we should have a system like this in the real world, right? I mean, obviously, if you could do it right, it would be amazing. But I think more than likely something would go wrong. Like, it would be in the hands of the wrong people, or it would mess everything up. But luckily this is fantasy, so we can just say they did it right this time. But back to laws. So I guess you'd have to have prisons and stuff, right? Because I think no matter what, you probably have some murders, however few, you know, some crime. But I think the justice system would be, it wouldn't focus at all on retribution. They would not do anything about retribution, you know, like revenge. It would purely be focused on protecting people from, you know, dangerous murderers and stuff, and like deterrence, preventing people from committing crimes. And I think one way, obviously, of deterrence would be if you kill someone, you'll have your freedom taken away. But another way of deterring people from doing crimes is just making sure they have a high standard of living, making sure they're satisfied. Because I think that inequality and all that kind of stuff is one of the biggest causes of crime. You got to go upstream from the problem to prevent it. Charlie asks, do people ever get a cabin fever-like feeling as they're not venturing out of the city? I think people go out of the city quite a lot. Like, it's fairly close to the woods, right? You can go to the woods pretty easily, and once you get beyond the farmland, it's basically just unspoiled like wilderness for mejleks and mejleks, you know, like dozens and dozens and dozens of kilometers. And people go there quite a lot, you know. People like do all the, you know, I don't know what you do in the woods. You have little fun rituals, go for walks. As well as that, they have vehicles for exploring. So they have planes and stuff, and I'm sure they have some kind of like Land Rover type, you know, Jeep type land vehicles as well. And maybe there are some odd like pathways, kind of dirt tracks that go off into the woods. So people will go and explore the world on their vehicles. There'd be some kind of underground high-speed trains to other cities as well, or you could fly there. So people are absolutely not confined to the city. Like that's where they live because it's the most convenient. That's where they have the most comfortable life. But they do regularly venture out into the woods and stuff. Some laggy dude asked a few questions. First of all, what instrument is being played in the background? Is it part of a religious ceremony, like a prayer, or is it a busker? So in reality, it's an instrument called a ghost catcher, which is a type of mouth bow. I got it from a guy called Nadishana, who I'll link below. The Dergiduk word for ghost catcher would be Jenzeyeleye. They're quite quiet, so I don't know if that's what it is in universe. Maybe it's someone playing a timer just for the sake of it. Next they ask, is there a broader history to Zhim and the entirety of the world for that matter, considering Zhim is so technologically advanced and most cities seem scattered? Katakana 1 asked a similar question. Zhim's been around for maybe like 8,000 years in a fairly stable state. I think originally it was founded by the survivors after the fall of some kind of ancient civilization. Maybe they were nomadic for a while and they traveled with the machines which would later become the Amagcatan. Okay, next. Hearing that organizations can be cooperatively owned, does that mean there is a form of currency, or is it that everyone gets a say no matter what? Yes, that's right. Like, all the members get a say in how the organization is run. You know, they'd vote on stuff and so forth. I think I'm going to do some more research before I flesh out exactly how currency and stuff works, but I think it would be interesting if it was something other than money. Not that I think money's necessarily a bad idea, but I think it's interesting to explore other ways of doing things, you know. Next, is Dergiduk unique to Zhim and the mejleks of surrounding area, or is it the lingua franca of the world? Dergiduk is spoken throughout Talagankash, which is the France-sized region where Zhim is located. The various cities around the world are pretty well connected with each other. They have an internet. They definitely could all speak the same language, but that does kind of stink of lazy world building to me. I wonder what their ideas about linguistics would be if there was only one language in the world. Maybe they'd think it was innate, unless there were languages from the past which are still remembered, which seems likely. And last but not least, what would happen if there was no longer enough housing? So the population of Zhim is pretty stable, and the Amagcatan tries to make sure there's always a slight housing surplus. I guess in a worst case scenario, the Amagcatan would send some volunteers and resources off to start a new city some distance away, of course after making sure it was in a place no one was living already. No Age 8691 says, one thing that wasn't mentioned was garbage. How do they dispose of their garbage? And the same with toilets. This is another thing I need to do some more research on. But I'll say, first of all, they use biodegradable materials wherever possible, and the Amagcatan has facilities for recycling and reusing things which are hard to make biodegradable, like batteries, for example. Sewage gets treated. Some of it is used as fertilizer on the fields. The water gets dumped in the river downstream of the city once it's been cleaned of anything dangerous. Fish Power 52 says, even if society achieves a 100% recycling rate, it would still be quite resource intensive to maintain such a standard of living and productivity. It's highly unlikely that they can obtain resources that are not native to their land. Does this mean that they engage in commerce? Zhim appears to be technologically more advanced in all aspects. Even if Zhim only exports peaceful commodities, wouldn't the region they choose to conduct trade with become extremely powerful, potentially gaining an advantage in conquering other lands? Does this mean Zhim would need to engage in puppet diplomacy to prevent such a superpower from emerging? I mean, there's a brilliant premise for some kind of story, right? I think the cities would have kind of moved past the adversarial stage. I think they'd share resources with each other, you know, because they know it's in everyone's best interest to do that. This is a total cop-out, but I'm going to read the two replies. Zeri Fem something QG2PY says, yeah, many of the raw resources you would need to make all the technology and luxury in Zhim just cannot be found in the same place. Makes you wonder how far those roots go. Some guy 8375 says, they mention at one point that the Amagcatan has roots that very efficiently extract natural resources, and that 97% of the population lives in cities like these. So presumably there isn't much conflict or competition, previously considering the sheer soft power of any of these cities. Which is an answer that I agree with. And that about does it. I'm probably going to upload a kind of second part to this in a couple days because someone asked me like how I made it. And I was going to have a segment looking at the blend file, but it ended up being long enough to be its own video, so I thought I'd just do that. And thank you so much for watching and for sending me all of your interesting questions. Anyway, ciao.